Great. I recently started doing stand-up with PowerPoint slides in the back, so now I'm ever so slightly terrified that the wrong one is going to come up. But we can talk about this in the lunch break. I'm really flattered to be here. Thank you for the invite to Harrington Starr and to Schroders. Quick intro about myself. My name is Felicitas. I've been working in the fintech industry for the past 6, almost 7-ish years. I started here in London. I now live in Amsterdam, which means I barely ever wear heels. So it's going to be interesting today. And I did not come up with this session title, actually. It was Nadia who came up with it. I've been having loads of conversations with Nadia and with the women in the industry that I get to connect with around, things that happen and things that happen to us in the industry that we work in. And Nadia just said to me, why don't you talk about all of these horrendous things that are happening and why people were not stepping in at the time? And I thought, you know what, we're going to try and keep it light, so I will get you involved in some of this. And as I was preparing for this talk, I was thinking 6 years ago when I started my first job in a graduate role in fintech, what would have been meaningful to me? What would have been something that I could walk away with? And to be completely honest, it's just that transparency and that honesty and then getting some action points. So I hope I can give you some of that today. And, I also want to just flag that the businesses that I've worked for, the business that I work for now, it's not their fault that these things happen. None of them kind of subscribe to that. So please don't go and hunt them down after the session on my LinkedIn. And also, I'm a Christian, so I practice radical forgiveness. I have no issues whatsoever with the people who have done these things. So without further ado, first question to ask you. Anyone use Slack, Microsoft Teams, any sort of internal chat systems at work? That is everyone. Besides, I think one person, no, that is everyone. Okay, fair enough. So let's talk about it. You might be wondering, how is this relevant? But the second question for you, in your Slack channels, I actually don't use Microsoft Teams, so I don't know if there's something similar to that where you can have like a group with people. I assume that you can. Has anyone ever posted, sent anything in the direction that has either made you feel uncomfortable or slightly inappropriate, anything in that direction? Okay. That's almost 50-50 in a room. That's interesting. Now, to the people who put red up, I'm going to challenge you to think about what you might deem to be inappropriate in a conversation that is online. It can seem quite minor, but I'll give you one example. I used to work for a company that was doing pizza Fridays. So whether you were in the business or not, whether you were in the office, there was pizza, there was beers, and usually you would have someone kind of do a presentation around a project that they were involved in or something in that direction. Or if you were a new joiner, like myself, you would introduce yourself and then kind of explain what your role was and so on and so forth. And then if you were working from home, they actually gave you an Uber Eats voucher. Oh, the days before COVID where we got our takeout paid for, which was great. And essentially, I got onto one of these presentations, and we had a Slack channel at that company where essentially you were meant to, post questions to the presenter. However, at that point in time, the culture in that business had already developed to be a point that the banter kind of took over those Slack channels. And very quickly, the moment that I started presenting, and I have to say kudos to the people who were able to do it, my face had been screenshotted and added to a GIF that was then uploaded and re-uploaded to that channel. And I won't give you too much of the context, but I did mention that I'm from Germany, and somehow someone thought it was a really good idea to bring up World War II, and the rest I'm going to leave to your imagination with my face on it. So that obviously wasn't received very well, but at the time, no one in the business particularly thought that it was that bad because this sort of joking culture in the Slack channels was just perfectly normal. So they didn't really think about it. It was then later raised and addressed, and actually shout out to that HR department. They did very well with that. But the point here is what you might deem as appropriate or inappropriate is very much up to you and your background and your culture. If you work with people, particularly in London, I mean, this room is full of diversity, we can already see it. What you deem funny isn't necessarily funny to someone else. As I said, I come from Germany, which I know my accent is misleading. I have no good concept of sarcasm whatsoever, and barely a sense of humor to start, which is a very British thing. Sarcasm is something that's so deeply ingrained in your culture. I'm saying you, I don't know if everyone in this room is British, I'm assuming. But for an outsider, it's very hard to understand. So you might think, oh, I'm just being sarcastic, but the other person might receive it as a pure insult. So something I want to point out here is that sort of keyboard warrior mentality that you see on social media is really slowly creeping into businesses as well. And you need to watch out for it, because people who are struggling with their mental health will be way more sensitive to that. And it can have dire effects towards, depression, anxiety, burnout, and you really don't want that. So whose job is it to intervene, right? Who needs to call this stuff out? And the answer is all of you. It can't just be your HR department who always gets involved and you raise a grievance. Everyone needs to be involved in that conversation. Now, second question to everyone here: who likes a drink after work? Who likes a pint, a G&T, a non-alcoholic? Oh, okay, we've got a few reds there. I can probably assume why some people do not like it. So let's talk about this as well. I feel like this is probably something where quite a few women in the room in particular have a story. And I just want to draw the attention to the fact that there's nothing wrong with socializing. We should do it more. What I will say, though, we are in London, we are in the UK, is there is a very, very big focus on drinking, particularly alcoholic drinks after work, particularly in the city. I mean, you can go to a pub from, I would say, maybe Wednesday afternoon, and people are already smashing the pints down. And technically, you can stay until the Sunday roast's over. So, you've got a few days. The second question for you, people who enjoy going to the pub after work: have you ever witnessed anything inappropriate in an after work sort of environment where alcohol was involved? Yep, the greens are going. Oh my goodness. Okay, I want to hear those stories afterwards. So the problem with this is oftentimes from a business perspective, you think, well, it happened outside of working hours. It happened outside of the office building. So who are we to police how people behave? Well, obviously you can't police it, but again, there need to be some guidelines, a code of conduct, some ethics that you can communicate within your businesses. I very recently went out for a work trip and ended up having some drinks and dinner with some colleagues. And I will spare you the details because it is quite a vulnerable story, but essentially I ended up being verbally and sort of physically harassed by a colleague. That's not even the worst thing. The worst thing was that of said colleague, their manager stepped out, saw it happening, stepped to the side and smoked a cigarette and just watched it unfold. And unfortunately, it then took about, I want to say, 3 to 4 days for some real follow-up to happen, because, you have to raise it. There needs to be an investigation. So people in HR already know what I'm talking about here. And it was quite scary, and it wasn't particularly nice. So unfortunately, again, in those situations, you might feel particularly powerless as the person that's happening to. But at the same time, if you are in that situation and you're witnessing it, you're probably also quite worried about how do I react? What can I do? Now, the first thing is obviously stay safe. It's not your job to kind of get physically involved when these things happen. Get some other people involved. If it's just you, make sure that you're somewhat documenting it. I mean, these days people just, wrap their phones out and just film it, and that's okay. But most importantly, I really want to challenge everyone to think about how we address social and after work events and cultures. Does it always have to be, heavily involved with drinking? And I say that with the caveat that you work in a really diverse work environment where people sometimes don't drink for religious reasons, for cultural reasons, maybe because they're pregnant, something like that. And you're already excluding a big group of people if you're focusing it so heavily on that. And don't get me wrong, like I love a gin and tonic, like I'm very much involved in that. But if we can start creating events that are safer from the get-go, we're already then limiting, what could happen at those events. And then last but not least, something that's ever so slightly more personal to me, and maybe also more personal to the people in the room. I'm half German, half Ivorian. That explains the afro. It doesn't explain the accent. Again, very sorry. And as I was journeying through my career and as I was kind of thinking about what to share here, my hair, for some reason, has always been a topic of conversation. From the very first interview I've ever had, up until recently, where a colleague asked me if they could touch it. Don't ever ask that question. It's not a good question to ask. It's very strange because it kind of makes you feel a little bit like you're being petted. Just don't get involved in that. I've had managers making fun of it. I've had people trying to ask me to cut it or to put it up to look more professional. And it's actually a conversation that's become a bit more mainstream recently. In the UK, you have the Black Young Professionals Network that I would really heavily employ you all to subscribe to, particularly if you have some sort of decision-making power in your business. They do a lot of good workshops to explain why this is so important. And then there's also a nonprofit, I believe they're a nonprofit called the Halo Collective. They help businesses pledge towards anti-hair discrimination in the workplace. And again, you might be thinking, well, how relevant is it? It's incredibly relevant because it's what we would call othering. And no one should ever walk into a building or into their workplace thinking, oh, I look a bit different than them. Oh, I'm not entirely sure if this is right. It really shouldn't matter. And it's not just about hair. It's also about certain hair coverings. Like you probably work with some people who, for example, are Sikh or want to wear different types of head coverings because of their religion or cultural backgrounds. It's really important to keep that in mind. And again, making jokes about that sort of level of banter, try and become a little bit more sensitive around this because it's different for you than it is to them. So what do I want to leave you with today? Firstly, don't feel that you need to get angry now and think, oh, all these terrible people and what they've done. That's not the aim of this session whatsoever. The aim really is for you to start thinking a little bit more differently and start to think a little bit more inclusively in your workplaces. And I know you're already here today. That's a fantastic step towards that. But here's some things that you can take away with you. Number one, start having conversations with people who are not like you and who don't look like you and who have different cultural backgrounds. Because frankly, that's the best way to learn, and also encourage your business to do that, particularly when it comes to hiring and retention and all of that. If you ever see anything unfold that you think is inappropriate, dangerous, or whatsoever, go obviously through the official channels, right? That's why they're there. You can raise it with HR, all of that fun stuff, but also, get that courage up that you can say something. I think, as it see it, say it sorted, what the TfL still uses, that applies to this as well, right? And active allyship means sometimes getting uncomfortable, and that also means getting involved even when you feel like you don't really have a voice. So I hope this has given you a bit of insight, and I hope it hasn't made you feel sad, but thank you so much for your time.